There. Welcome back to COM110 Interpersonal. And today we're going to get into some good, juicy topics, and it's conflict in relationships. And now we already talked about the way that we can manage relationships, how we form them, how we can end them a little bit. And so now conflict, this is just something that happens in our life. And so right off the bat, your chapter gets into, what is a disagreement versus what is an argument. And here's your definition also for conflict. So just trying to understand conflict first off, a disagreement, that's just a difference of opinion. I can say I like coffee, you can say that you like hot tea, and I guess according to the book, this is a disagreement. Now, it doesn't have to be this intense, passion driven conversation or anything, but that's just our difference of opinion. And it's often going to occur during an argument or a verbal exchange between two or more people who have differing opinions on a given subject. Now, an argument can become a little bit more heated. And so disagreements, they're not that bad. We're going to have them. Arguments, they're also not that bad either, but they can be. And so we get into the definition of conflict here. And I know it's quite lengthy, but it's an interactive process occurring when conscious beings have opposing or incompatible actions, beliefs, goals, ideas, motives, needs, objectives, obligations, resources, and our values. That's a pretty intense one. I just look at this as thinking like, hey, we cannot come eye to eye on something, and it's got to be interactive. We got to talk about it. We got to have conversations about it, trying to figure out something. I really, really like this key term here, and that is your tolerance for disagreement. I think of myself as I don't really have a very high tolerance of disagreement. And so, what this means is that whether an individual can openly discuss differing opinions without feeling personally attacked or being confronted. So, your book here says that people that have a high tolerance for disagreement, they can easily discuss opinions. They can pretty much, have a normal conversation slash argument with someone. And sometimes I think that it's entertaining. Now, people meet here with a low tolerance for disagreement. They're going to feel personally attacked. They're going to see as other people devaluing their opinion. And so this can be really like hurtful to your self worth, your self esteem. That's just how we manage conflict, how we understand conflict. I always think that the best way to kind of understand this is like, hey, I recognize it. And now I'm going to try to move on and try to help myself when I do engage in conflict. I want to kind of focus now on these two perspectives of conflict. Your book talks about these two different perspectives. There's a lot of research based off of both of them. And it's pretty like, how do I want to say this? It's pretty established research, but they are so different. So your first one here, and it was by, I think, yeah, McCroskey and Wheelis. And so they focus on disruptions in normal workings of a settings and of a system, excuse me. And they think that conflict is bad. And so they describe it as a negative phenomenon in interpersonal relationships. Nothing good can come out of it. Conflict, it's going to be destructive to the interpersonal relationship. It's going to hurt the people and the relationship itself. Usually, conflict, it's only going to happen because of some distrust, some hostility, some suspicion that you have. And so, again, I'm sharing the definition of a disagreement here. That's just a difference of opinion between two or more people. But now we have specific types of disagreement here. So that first one is substantive, and this is that a disagreement that people have about a specific topic or issue. So your book, I believe, talks about, where does it say? Oh, if you and your best friend, you want to eat at two different restaurants. According to this perspective, you are in a disagreement. This substantive disagreement, the specific topic, I want to eat at restaurant A. My best friend wants to eat at restaurant B. We are in a substantive disagreement. Now, when we get into procedural disagreement, this is concerned with the procedure of how a decision should be reached. So, with me and my friend, it's like, what are we going to do? I think we should flip a coin. That's easy. But my friend is like, well, I think we should play rock, paper, scissors. It's like, okay, now the disagreement is on the decision of trying to find a resolution to our disagreement. It's so annoying to think about how in our interpersonal relationships we nitpick everything and thinking about the specific topic, thinking about how to fix it. And so looking at it just in this perspective, any type of conflict, it's bad, it's destructive. We can't learn anything from it. Personally, I'm not a big fan of this one because I'm a big fan of the second one, and that's conflict is a normal part of human communication. This one is by Can and Abigail, and they look at how, hey, conflict is normal. It's an inevitable part of life. It's gonna happen. So you might as well learn how to manage it, how to work through it. It is one of the foundational building blocks of interpersonal relationships. I think about some conflict that I've had with friends or romantic partners, in which after the conflict, you feel stronger. It's like, hey, we were able to figure that out. Like, I feel good about us. Now, managing and overcoming conflict makes a relationship stronger, it can make it healthier, and that conflict can help people seek better health outcomes within their interactions. Thinking about the health outcomes of like, this makes me feel good talking about it. Now your body's kind of reacting to it positively, and that both parties, it says here, both parties must agree to engage in pro-social conflict management strategies for this to work effectively. We both got to be on the same page here. Now, how conflict is beneficial, I want you to check this out. It's on page 291, and it has this really long list here about how conflicts help people find a common goal, how people can learn to manage it more effectively for the future then. What else? Conflict can lead to creative solutions to problems, can help people become more assertive and less aggressive, and then also help people manage their emotions. I really love this list. I didn't want to include it because it was like a lot of text, but it's interesting to think how conflict can help us. Conflict is good. I think a relationship with no conflict, that's kind of bad. And you're going to question, why is there no conflict? Why is there no like heated little moments, heated little disagreements, right? Alrighty, so let's talk specifically about interpersonal conflict. And these four factors, they got to be present in order for it to be known as interpersonal conflict. Now, these are from the same researchers as the last one, Con and Abigail. And so you can see they're really trying to like work through it together. First off, the conflict parties, they gotta be interdependent, thinking that we need to make some sort of relationship work between one another. Your book says occurs when we're in some kind of relationship. You want to maintain that, and you got to put that effort to maintain that relationship. If you just want to like drop the person, you don't want to hang out with them anymore, that is not an interpersonal conflict. That's just conflict and you want to be done with it. Now, they also need to have the perception that they seek incompatible goals or outcomes, or they favor incompatible means to the same end. I want you to take a moment and read that again. They have the perception that they seek incompatible goals. Okay, and we both want to eat at different restaurants. So what are we going to do exactly? We both want different things. It's good to recognize that right away, but it's also good to recognize like, I understand you, I hear you, I'm listening. And so hopefully you're doing the same with me. Now, the perceived incompatibility has the potential to adversely affect the relationship, leaving emotional residues if not addressed. So what this means is that, okay, this perceived incompatibility, it can negatively impact us. And if we leave it around for long enough, the residue of this negative feeling, we're just bottling it up and it's gonna explode. So we need to address it. Now, when we find that need, we can go to the very last one here, and there's a sense of urgency about the need to resolve the difference. We have this difference, we need to figure it out right now. And so I do think to myself, like, yeah, maybe you're gonna explode here. You've been bottling it up too much. That urgency of like, we need to sit down, we need to discuss because I don't want this to continue anymore. And it could be kind of heated, right? But we still need to engage in that communication. You don't want it to just reach a boiling point and totally explode. But if you do, hopefully they're there to listen through this interpersonal conflict. So we're talking a lot about conflict here. And of course, we got to talk about our emotions and our feelings. Now, emotions and feelings are not the same thing. I was pretty surprised to hear this and think about this, but thinking, okay, they are two different things. One of them, it's our reactions to stimuli in the outside environment. That is emotions, dealing with what's happening around us. And now this can also show our reactions to how we react to it. Reactions such as like our blood flow, our brain activity, our nonverbal reaction to things, how we're just reacting to it, right? What's happening, and we can like see it. We can measure our emotions. Whereas feelings, that's the one I think we look at more. These are the responses to thoughts, to our interpretations given to emotions based off of our experience, memory, expectations, things that have happened in our lives. So, with emotions, thinking about, okay, I am happy and I can feel my heart racing a little bit. Maybe my nonverbal reactions is that I'm smiling. And then my feeling is, well, when I smile, I feel happy. So you can see how they kind of come hand in hand, but they are not the same thing. Now, being emotional is an inherent part of being a human. It's going to happen in our lives and we can't stop it. I want you to celebrate your emotions. And so we get into emotional awareness. Love this word. And it's an individual's ability to clearly express in words, to verbally express what they're feeling and why. Why are you feeling a certain way that you're feeling? Have you ever had a moment where you didn't know how to express how you were feeling? Where you felt kind of, I'm not saying emotionless, but we just couldn't put into words how we're actually experiencing something. Emotional awareness comes into play when we know about words, we know we're in tune with ourselves, and just we're able to express it in words. Now, it's important to distinguish between emotional states and then also how we interpret an emotional state. Something that's hysterical to me might not be hysterical to you. And so just knowing those differences, that's a big one. Now, I want you to check out this list of emotions. It's on it starts on page 296, and it is quite long. It has a list of words when you're confused about emotions. It has positive emotions, negative emotions. And it's just nice to kind of read through it and learn these new emotion words or understanding. Hey, maybe I'm not feeling negative right now. I'm feeling upset, uptight. I feel sorry. It also says like adult. There's so many words. Please check it out. I think it's so cool. This is only going to help us, this list of words, with our emotional intelligence. And we have talked about this a little bit, and this is an individual's appraisal and expression of their emotions. And then also, this is a key here, the emotions of others in a manner that's going to enhance our thought, our living, and our communicative interaction. So with conflict, I'm able to understand my emotions and I'm able to kind of look at whoever I'm having conflict with and try to understand their emotions, try to see where they're coming from. This is totally built by perceiving, understanding, managing, and then using those emotions, being appropriate with them. Think back to communication competence. How am I being appropriate? And then how am I going to be effective in this instance in solving this conflict, through understanding each other's emotional intelligence. I think it's absolutely amazing. I would love for you, and it's on page 301. And I included some screenshots here in case you don't have the book yet, but this is going to be related to your journal. And what I want you to do is take this survey. This survey is going to help you kind of understand your emotional intelligence. And so 1 through 5, you'll answer each of these. I'm aware of my emotions and I experience them. I would say, yeah, I think so. Maybe I'm a 4 or 5. You can see but there's only 20 here. And then once you definitely write these down, then on the next page, you will kind of add their scores for understanding emotions, add your scores for managing emotions, and then lastly, using emotions. And then you'll also see here, we kind of get into the positive, common, and negative dyadic coping mechanisms that we have. I think it's super interesting. I think it's fun to take these assessments to realize, what's my conflict style slash what's my emotional intelligence, which I feel because sometimes when we think it's not always right. Alrighty, let's get into one of the last things I want to talk to you about today. This involves power, influence, and just trying to understand. I think power is the big one. And we have conflict here. That's what we're focusing on. And so I want you to think of the influence that people have with conflict. And so influence here is when an individual, maybe a group of people, alters another person's thinking, their feelings, their behaviors through one of these 3 communication tactics. And so when you're in conflict with someone, they're going to influence us. And maybe they might influence us in ways that, make us better conflict managers or maybe bad ones. And we're constantly influenced by others. I truly think about the word itself. And of course, I think about TikTok and Instagram right away of how I see people do stuff on those apps. And then it's like, I want to do them too, right? So now the first one is accidental communication. People can influence you when they send messages to another person without even realizing those messages are being sent. This is not planned at all. Great example is if you're at a coffee shop, the person in front of you is ordering, and then the barista asks them, "Oh, will you like to donate $1?" And then they say yes. And so then you go up there after overhearing that. They ask you after you order if you want to donate $1. And you're like, yeah, why not? The person in front of me did it. That person in front of me wasn't purposefully trying to influence you to do something. It just was not planned. Now we also have expressive, or it's also known as emotionally based communication. And these are states of how they can influence others. This is usually verbal, but I think nonverbal is like the popular one here. And this looks at how you can influence other people, maybe the way that you're nodding, and then all of a sudden you're nodding too, and you're expressing the same things that they are. A lot of times, if you see someone crying, and of course you go up to them, you ask them, "Are you okay?" And now you're emotionally basing your communication off of what's happening here. They are influencing like the tone of the conversation, the communication. Now, it's often not conscious. You don't really know what's happening, but it can be an unconscious thing. Now, this last one, it is purposeful, and it's rhetorical communication. This one, you are purposefully creating and sending messages to another person in the hopes of altering another person's thinking, their feelings, or their behaviors. I want you to think that they're like actually writing something down, that they want you to do a specific thing, and they're trying to think about specifically what they want to influence you on. You can think about people on TikTok and when they put captions, what is the rhetorical communication here of them trying to influence you with? What are they trying to say? And they think it out. Have you ever thought out an Instagram post, the caption before? It's the same thing. So here's something I want to look at now, and it's the 5 bases of power. There's a lot to really look at here, and it focuses on French and Raven. They're the researchers looking at the bases of power and how they differ. And so here's your definition of power. You can see as a degree that a social agent, person A, can get another person, that's P, to alter their thoughts, feelings, and or behaviors. It's just a simple way when you're reading it, it makes a lot more sense of like, oh, okay, this influencer on TikTok, A, is trying to influence me, P, right? It makes me think of what is it, Pretty Little Liars or something, where there's that person that has that name A. I didn't watch that show, but I heard enough about it. So let's look at these different five bases. And so first off, we have informational. This type of power is that someone, they're trying, the A, they are trying to share this information with you. And they're trying to, share it with you so you understand it, so you can get a grip of it. Informational power, it's very strong, and it's often the first form of power in which we come into contact with. I want you to think about like, how is that true? Well, school. We go to school when we're young, and these are the first times that we're dealing with someone in like a leadership position or teacher, and they have the power because they're sharing information with you. When I class prep for our class specifically, I had to think, what do I want to talk about and what do I want to leave out? I think of the power of information as like I'm choosing to leave out some stuff sometimes. I have that power of sharing what information I want to share with you. Now, we also have coercive and reward. I look at this as like the five bases of power. This is 2A and this is 2B. So, coercive power is the ability to punish an individual who does not want to apply to, your influencing attempts. And then we can think about reward power is this is the ability to offer an individual rewards if they comply with your influencing attempts. So one, we're trying to force them to, slash the other one, oh, I'll give you this if you do whatever it is I'm influencing you to do. Now you can punish or you can reward someone, but you can see how maybe like in the workplace, oh, I'll, give you Saturday off if you work extra long on Thursday. And so the reward is like, well, do I want the day off? Or, unless my boss makes me come in, now that's coercive power. And it's like, that's not really going to be good for anybody. We have legitimate power. This is the third one. And this focuses on, and now I'm going to say some letters here, remember A and P. This focuses on that because a person, P, believes that A has a valid right to influence them, P has an obligation to accept A's attempts. I want you to think that you feel like you need to, understand the power that you need to be influenced by this person. It does say here cultural legitimate power. This can occur when an agent, A, is viewed as having the right to influence others. Maybe it's based off of their role in culture. Or you can also think too of the structural legitimate power. This one looks at like a specific position based off of social hierarchy. And so they have that power and I need to be influenced by them. I'm going to be influenced by them. The legitimate power here because they are legit and they have some sort of title. Now we have expert. And this one is when we give power to someone based off of their perceived knowledge. We think that they know something. Now, this can only work if you trust the person, if you actually think that they're an expert, and if you think that they're telling the truth, right? And so the problem with this is like on the internet, anybody can say they're an expert. The word expert is very like loosely, shared about in our world and society. So you gotta make sure that they're an expert, that they do know what they're talking about so you can trust them. Now, our last one here is reverent. And that is when you're trying to, the ability to influence another person because you are associated with them, because P wants to be associated with A. So if you think to yourself, oh, I want to hang out with a popular group of kids, this reverent power is like, what can you do to start hanging out with them? And so it says here, It's about relationship building and the desire for a relationship. You want this, you want a relationship with them. All these different types of power. I know that's kind of like a lot, but just thinking about different examples in our lives and different relationships, how can they hit one of these five? And the last thing I want to talk to you, because thinking about power, how it can come back around with conflict and all of that, this is the STLC conflict model. You can see some names that we already talked about, Abigail and Con. And so what they think is that, hey, conflict is gonna happen. So what can we do to kind of like get through it? What are some tips and tricks? And first of all, you gotta just stop. I want you to think about some of your most heated arguments, heated conflicting moments. And so you need to take time and just be present with the conflict itself. Because a lot of times we can start arguing about everything else that's happening. And it's like, wait, what's the main problem here? So communication problems, they're going to occur because people react to conflict situations when they arise, and then they're not really looking at the conflict itself. So it says here, you just need to take a time out. Just stop, right? What are we actually arguing about? Then that links into, you got to think about it. You want to think about the conflict itself. You want to think, okay, like what possible course of action should I take? What could be done here to help with this conflict, with my feelings, and all of that. Your book says that you can either simply sit back and avoid the conflict. You don't have to think about it. You're like, hey, I'm choosing to not think about it. Or in this stage, you can think, how can I change myself? Am I in the wrong here? Or third, how can I change the other person? Which is very, very difficult. I want you to imagine trying to change another person. That's hard. And then lastly, you could just try to change the situation. So like, let's say the conflict is like you don't like your roommate anymore. Well, you can move out, right? Now, we don't always have a simple solution like that. So when you think about it, it's like, what's going on here? The conflict, me, you, what can we change? So well, it can happen. I think it's really good that we need to think what could be done. Now, there's a hard lesson here as well. Your book states some conflicts will not be settled between people. Some conflicts are settled by separation. So just kind of keep that in mind. This occurs in the thinking process. Then we have listen. The third step, we are not the best listeners. So we need to kind of take a step back, listen to what the other person has to say. A lot of times we feel defensive during a conflict, like we got to stick up for ourselves, defend ourselves. And then when we're listening for flaws, which is kind of terrible because we're not focusing on the conflict itself. So the goal must be to suspend your judgment. You gotta think, hey, I just want to listen, I want to interpret. We listen and we don't judge, right? And then lastly, you communicate. That's when you get into, talking with the other person. And isn't this interesting? This entire conflict model, communication is the last one because this is the hardest one. The two researchers, they say it's the hardest one to do effectively if the first three are not done correctly. So you really need to do these first three in order to try to resolve your conflict and then get into communication. Alrighty, that's your entire chapter. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I find it pretty interesting. Conflict sucks, but we need to have it because if we don't have it, we're not going to learn, we're not going to grow. I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you later.